Whether you're an employee or a business owner, repetitive tasks is a major constraint that holds you back from developing and growing. It quickly expands to the point where you have no more capacity to take on any other projects, developments, and exploration of new areas. It starts to feel more and more like a groundhog day where you repeat the same task day in and day out and experience the same results over and over again. Keep watching, as in this video, I'll share how you break free from this scenario. The quick answer is that you need to build systems around those repetitive tasks that allows anybody else to do the same work and achieve the same result. The fact that I have the time to record these videos, focus most of my time on our startup, is because for Swingstep, we built so many systems that I can step out of the day-to-day work. In fact, I had the same goal for my team where I wanted to make it possible for anyone to go for a longer holiday or for a longer period of time focus on a different project while their repetitive tasks could be handled by somebody else. But for this to work, we have to fight powerful human tendencies and insecurities. You see, there's an alluring sense of security that comes in the feeling of knowing you're the only one who can do a certain task. As an employee, it makes you feel like you cannot get fired, or as a business owner, it feels like other people cannot just run away with your systems and become your worst competitor. Of course, these fears are not completely unjustified. These situations can indeed happen. But thinking there's security in being the only one who can do a certain task is like avoiding sports in order not to get injured. The natural aging process will just deteriorate the body and the mind. Similarly, your only real security is in your ability to continuously explore and develop. And systematizing repetitive tasks is a major opportunity to free up your time so that you can explore and develop. In fact, my goal for our employees is to create an environment where there's an ongoing process of self-actualization as the way of creating long-term security, both for the organization and for each individual person. In fact, this is a topic I want to jump much deeper into in my next video. So make sure you subscribe, follow, press that notification bell so that you don't miss it. A powerful way to fight fear and insecurities is to develop a strong foundation of trust. But trust is one of those emergent qualities. They come out of getting many different layers right. And in this video, I want to share with you one of those layers I've been working a lot on for the past 15 years. And this concept is about trading power in exchange for trust. I call this concept the balance of power. And I first learned about this idea from the book, The Art of Conflict Management. This was one of those, the Great Courses lecture series. I don't know if you ever listened to one of those. The book was highlighting research that showed that conflicts are easier to resolve if both people have equal amount of power. They mentioned several sources of power that you can use as currency in order to achieve this. And I've been experimenting with this idea as a way of developing trust. I use it both internally to build trust with my team, but actually also externally to build trust with my customers and the community. And in this video, I'll share a broader set of examples to give you a fuller understanding for how you can use this concept to build trust. I've been very fortunate to have been working with hundreds of people over the years, and I've noticed a very clear difference when working with somebody who feels like a peer, someone I can meet eye to eye with. And this is a person who is very comfortable in the value they bring and the position they have. And there's a big difference compared to working with someone who comes from a position of fear and insecurities. Each time I managed to reduce their fear and insecurities by instilling trust, the work was not only much more enjoyable, but also the final outcome better because both parties brought their whole selves to the table. The collaborative process became all about achieving the best outcome rather than trying to get a specific outcome. And in order to achieve this, I found different ways to effectively give away my power to the other person until they felt they can trust me and focus on generating the best outcome rather than protecting themselves. To understand how to trade power for trust, let me share a few of the sources of power that I've been exploring. We've been exploring power that comes from structures. This is the boss versus employee situation, business versus customer, owner versus renter situation, power that comes through agreements, contracts, promises, commitments, things like that. Knowledge power, someone with access to more information has power, on expert versus a novice, someone with a plan and vision versus someone without it, or relationship power, someone related to somebody with power, circle of friends versus people outside of the circle, people who share certain characteristics in common versus those who don't, and people in an intimate relationship versus people with loose ties. All of these sources of power can be used as a way to trade power for trust. In my experience, talking about power, ownership, trade triggers all sorts of emotions in people. And I know many business owners who are struggling with this, so let me share how I think about it. The way I see it, people who take on a lot of responsibility and risk tend to get a lot of power. For example, as a business owner, I'm taking on a lot of responsibility and risk, and I'm ultimately the one responsible if something happens. I'm legally bound by contracts, rules, obligations, and if something happens, it can be at the great loss of my personal finance, even my freedom, depending on what happens. And sometimes it doesn't matter if it was caused by me or one of my employees or even sometimes the customers. But by me taking this risk and responsibility, the hurdles for others to have certain experience and opportunities become a lot easier. For example, Swingset had over 20 people working full time, engaging with the dance and events they love, and most of them would not have taken this step if it wasn't for the business I started. So I would, for example, not turn my company into a nonprofit association as a way of balancing power, as that would also completely change the fundamental structure of who carries the responsibility. And suddenly there won't be the same experience and opportunities. But for SwingStep, I did decide to go 100% transparent with the entire team about our finances and salaries as a way to establish trust while still not passing on any of the ultimate risk and responsibility to the other people. I believe the world will be a much better place if each person strives to find more ways of increasing their power while at the same time develop the character that wields that power responsibly. There, I quoted two Spider movies in less than 1 minute. How about that? Right? Now, in my experience, if a person is too anxious and fearful, the amount of power I would have to give away in order to have an eye to eye conversation would just be too exhausting. It would remove so much of the enjoyment of having a relationship with that person. So I think it's a very valuable and productive goal for each person to build trust by having power to give away rather than thinking that the lack of power establishes trust. In my experience, it just fosters fears and insecurities in people. And usually nothing gets done in these conditions until somebody decides to carry that responsibility. Now, to me, this is total logic and matches my experience. And I don't know if this is a controversial view, so please let me know in the comments. Okay, so let's go over a few sources of power and how you can trade them for trust. The first one we're going to talk about is knowledge power. Knowing more than the other person simply gives you power. We already talked about this in the perspective between the teacher and the student, owner and employee, but also, for example, in an event where you have staff who've been there for several editions versus the new recruits. This source of power comes from education, refined skills, and simply being in the room where it happens. Room where it happens. Hamilton, anybody? No? Yeah? Good. So you know if the job was done well or if corners were cut. That's knowledge power. So how do we trade this for trust? The simplest example I can give you is a 100% money back guarantee that businesses like ours offer. I know exactly what kind of experience people will have at this event. I've designed it myself. We run it for several editions. So I can give away rights to my customers that I'm not obliged to give them in exchange to building enough trust that they are willing to depart from hard-earned money in exchange for a great experience. Another example is something I already sort of mentioned before, where I gave my team 100% transparency into all our finances, numbers, contracts, and everything like that, so that when we talk about our abilities, results, and goals, they know these are actually anchored in the real numbers. There's a lot of trust that is built from there. But actually, I also had another objective with this transparency, and that is that I wanted my team to be able to build the best possible processes and systems for the company. And I wanted to make sure I eliminate any risk that they are operating from another set of data than I would, simply because I have access to a set of data that they don't have. I wanted them to be able to do as good of a job as I would do because we can all look at the same set of data. However, those with knowledge power often suffer from the fallacy of the expert. What I mean with this is that sometimes when we feel that we are clearly the expert, other people should follow our advice blindly. And you probably already experienced that this is rarely the case that people do that. It's like the doctor who prescribes a medicine after only a superficial exam. We feel very skeptical. You need to first help them answer questions like, will this work for me? Will this work for my budget? Will I be able to maintain this afterwards? Will I be dependent on you forever if I implement this? So you need to clearly demonstrate that your expertise is adapted to my unique situation. That's the work that we need to go through. You can trade knowledge power for trust by, for example, letting the other person decide how fast we should move through the process of understanding. Or you clearly demonstrate that you consider their unique situation when you're sharing your advice. Another thing you can do is to take on some or all of the risk of negative consequences that might come out of a decision. Now, the interesting thing is that once you've established trust, many of these things are not needed anymore. Your next interactions and decisions will just go so much faster. When I share this concept with people, I often get this question that comes out of fear back where they're asking, but what if they take advantage of you? And that's actually exactly what you want to do. You want to set up an environment where it's possible for the other person to take advantage of you. But in a free society, we always have the choice to step out of that relationship. And in a setting where you have one to many relationships, whether you're the employer who has several employees or you're the employee who work with different organizations, it's a one to many relationship over a prolonged period of time. Here, by giving away power to build trust over the prolonged period of time, you become the winner. And the more power you manage to develop so you have something to give away, the easier it becomes to quickly develop trust at scale. And honestly, for the past 15 years of implementing this concept, it's only been perhaps a couple of times where we had to step out of a relationship because we felt the person was too blatantly taking advantage of our generosity of giving power. The next source of power I want to talk about is relationship power. This is it's who you know, not what you know, or the more modern version of that is who knows you, not who you know. But either way you look at it, it's about the power that comes from the association you have with other people. And this source of power expresses itself in your ability to influence, call in favors, or even reaching people others in your position cannot reach. Just like everything else, relationship power can be additive to trust or subtract from trust. For example, it's hard for a person to feel trust in a system of job promotion where the criteria are vague and not transparent. And meanwhile, some of the other candidates go golfing with the decision maker, right? Or you're having a discussion and a debate about which direction we should go, and the other person is trying to win by dragging other people into their side rather than presenting more evidence for their case or seeking more perspectives. So hoarding relationship power to get their way is very damaging for trust. So how do we use relationship power to create trust? I've experienced moments where while we're debating an important challenge, one of the persons trying to talk to me in private about the direction to take and have me present the idea to the team as if it's my own, so the idea carries the weight of my position. Now, instead of going along with it, trust is built when you support the other person to figure out how can they present their data and intuition in the best way they can and let the regular decision-making process take its course. Meanwhile, also explore with the other person why they felt they have to go through you, right? Trying to understand the underlying issue, fear, and lack of skill that is there in order to figure out how you can help them bring their whole selves to the game. Another way to use relationship power to build trust was that we once found ourselves in a situation where we had to make a very difficult decision as a team. And we knew that some of the people in our community would have a very hard time empathizing with this decision and would lash out. And because my team interacted with the community on a weekly basis, where in this case, I was actually one step removed, it was easier on the team if I channeled the stress directly to me and only to me. By me absorbing the outlash, it allowed my team to save a lot of energy while also seeing that I'm willing to take the heat to protect them. Some say that this is one of the main values of hiring an external consultant in enterprises, where if the project fails, they blame the consultant for it, which is actually one of the values the consultant bring to the table to save the department head's face. Another example is that you might find yourself in negotiation situations where your close relationship with the decision maker can foster distrust in the process. And by deliberately asking somebody more neutral to make the decision, you're actively giving away your relationship power in order to enhance the trust in the process. Now, the last source of power I want to share with you today is agreement power. Agreement power can be as simple as let's shake hands on it to a fully integrated structure that is set up in the organization that everybody agrees to follow. One of the fundamental agreement structures that we implemented at SwingStep comes from the book The Decision Maker by Dennis Backe. In short, whenever we are making a decision, we first declare what kind of decision-making process we will implement here. And It could be anything from I decide as an owner all the way to the other side of the spectrum where we only go through with this if we have a unanimous decision. But the one we used the most was called the advice seeker concept from this book. The advice seeker process involves us deciding a single person who has the power to make that final decision. And the criteria to become the decision maker is based on who's most qualified to make that decision or who's most impacted by that decision. Now, the responsibility of the decision maker is to first seek the advice of everybody involved or impacted by that decision and clearly demonstrate that they have understood the received advice before making that decision. So in any situation where I don't just simply use my position as a owner and the boss to make a decision, I'm giving away my power in exchange for trust. And the effectiveness of that trust is in relationship to how well I hold myself to these agreements and don't just overrule decisions I don't like. And the more important these decisions, the more I'm helping my team to develop trust in that I'm taking these concepts seriously. Now, if I think, or frankly, anybody else for that matter, thinks that they would have done a better decision, we first let the decision that was made fully run its course. And only after observing the results for a while do we allow ourselves to revisit that decision. But trust needs to be built both ways. For example, a new recruit to an event might need to use agreement power to get opportunities they wouldn't otherwise have. For example, they might say, hey, let me take this challenge on. I promise to do it by this date, and I'll give you progress report on these dates. This way, if I fail or something happens, you still have time to react and do something about it, but it gives me the opportunity to show you what I can do. And this person is then setting up a structure that they agree to follow, then helps the organizer to develop some trust in them. Another situation that you might find yourself in is in heated meetings or heated conversation with another person where you feel like you're not getting anywhere with it unless you decide to both agree on setting some ground rules. And a ground rule could, for example, be you're going to get 5 minutes to talk, and I'm going to first paraphrase and repeat what you said until you say, yes, I have understood your perspective, but then I want to have the same courtesy, and I'm going to take my 5 minutes and you're going to paraphrase back to me. Such agreements can really help unlock conflict situations and build enough trust in the process that if I don't interrupt you, you won't interrupt me, for example. But what if we need to change an agreement? For me as an entrepreneur, speed of implementation is crucial. And I love reading books and take the ideas I'm getting from them and trying them out on the business. And of course, there's been many situations that ideas didn't work. One example is, fortunately, I don't hear about it as much anymore, is the balanced scorecard framework. It's a fundamental concept of how we work in the team, how we make decisions on what we're going to focus on. And it was disastrous for us. So we had to roll that back. And from experiences like this, I've also learned that there's a few ground rules, a few processes we have to go through in order to not lose trust while still being able to explore new ideas and new ways of doing things. First, you want to be clear whether the agreement you're entering is something that can be undone or not. Jeff Bezos talks about this as one-way door decisions versus two-way door decision-making processes, where if it's a two-way door decision-making process, you can be a lot faster and quicker with experimentations because you can always walk back through it if you were not happy about the outcome. Second, be very clear that you give new agreements a trial run if you can. The event industry can naturally do this because each event gives a good natural bounded context. And we can say things like, for this event, let's try to do it this way. An example of this could be, let's give a 200% money back guarantee instead of the usual 100% money back guarantee for this course round or for this event or for this part of the event, just to see what happens. A concrete example for SwingStep was that we are running an experiment where we decided instead of giving away a usual 1 hour free experience, we give a full 6-week course as a free trial experience to people. So they get the full experience before they commit to pay for a subscription or anything like that. And we simply just put a time limit on it and saying this was just valid until this date. So far, I'm really happy with the results because we made the word of mouth so much easier because we printed these vouchers out in really nice, pretty looking things that they can hand to their friends. And the response and reaction was exactly like I was hoping for. Amazing. Everybody got surprised that we are so generous with our trial period. Another way to deal with this is to communicate your intention that you're changing the agreement before you change the agreement. You can say something like, I'm aware that we agreed on X. However, because of Y, I need to step out of this agreement. Now, leaving it at that, you will probably still lose some trust. But you can make it better if you first communicate your intent and leave space for the other person to communicate their situation. So you can say, I'm considering to step out of X agreement because of Y. Can you share with me the consequences this will have on you and our relationship? By first understanding the impact it will have on the other person and clearly communicate that understanding, it helps a lot to reduce the amount of trust you will lose in that process. But perhaps the best way that you can go through with this without losing any trust is to ask for permission. You can say something like, I need to step out of X agreement because of Y, or I should step out of X agreement because of Y. Would you be willing to explore a way to go through with this in a way that works for you too? As a conclusion, you might have noticed that we can trade using all the different sources of power to develop trust. In the 100% money back guarantee, for example, we use agreement power in order to balance out our knowledge power as a way of creating trust. In the other examples, we, for example, balanced structural power that I had as an owner by giving agreement power of having open book policy or following a certain decision-making policy in order to develop trust, right? So we're trading across these different sources. In general, be very careful about trading power you don't have. This video was all about building the trust that is needed in order to systematize repeated tasks. That means sometimes it's very tempting for us to make promises like, hey, help me replace your current task with AI, and I promise you will not get fired, right? It's really hard to keep a promise like that. You have no idea what's going to happen with your organization, what's going to happen with your relationship with that other person. So things like that is better not to even be addressed as part of the agreement making process. Rather, point towards a track record of leaving people better off than you found them. By the nature of SwingStep being a teaching organization, I've had a lot of perhaps unique opportunities to explore different ways of creating environments that nurtures self-actualization. At least for me, I drive so much enjoyment working with peers where I meet eye to eye that I've dedicated a lot of resources to help people grow their power to the point they know they can go anywhere else and be successful, but still choose to work with us. Those are the people I really want to have around me. And in my next video, I want to share what I've learned about creating environments that are conducive to the process of self-actualization, both at individual level, at a team level, and at an organizational level. So if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you don't miss that video. All right, thank you for watching.